So we're going to jump and dive right on into this. The conversation today is about the discipline of focus. And really, there's so many things that are constantly coming at us. Whether it's platforms, personalization tools, AI loyalty, data dashboards, new ordering channels, all promising to improve the guest experience. And many of it very well can and will. But when everything becomes a priority, how do you balance that? Where do you direct the attention of the team? What do you say is this is the single thing that's going to drive the impact of the success of our organization for this year? And so focus has become a leadership discipline. Not because innovation has slowed, but actually it's because it's become much more complex and it's way more accelerated than it has been in prior years and in the past. And so the guest relationship now spans marketing, technology, operations, and increasingly these third-party platforms. And so everybody touches it. But if that's the case, then who truly owns it? How do we continue to prioritize and identify what even our customers are looking for? And how do you protect clarity of ownership in a world with constant innovation? I mean, that's one of the big things. We feel like we're on this just spinning wheel of everything coming at us so quickly. So that's what we're here to explore today a little bit. And I'm greatly appreciative and honored. We've got an absolutely dynamic, incredible panel. All of them have been introduced, but the one thing I do want to highlight is specifically we handpicked this group because GJ comes from SPB, incredible organization. It brings that CEO C-suite vision and purview, and across a multitude of brands, right? Casual, upscale casual, fine dining. Nigel Henry comes from global operations for Yum Brands. And it's just spectacular, the reach and the impact that he's able to have, but he's dealing with operations across thousands of locations. Blake Johnson is head of marketing for Chuck E. Cheese Entertainment, so that's more that entertainment. I'm sure that you probably have celebrated many of your personal birthdays there as a child, or you probably have young ones that have probably celebrated there as well. So we wanted to bring in these other disciplines to help shape and form what are some of these other organizations, other leaders within your organizations, what are they challenged with? What are they facing? And so it's really about the guest relationship in a tech-heavy world. And so I'm going to kick us off here real quickly. And GJ, I'm going to start with you. At your level, and you've had an incredible journey, what's the difference between activity and focus?
Well, take it back to, first of all, it's great to be here, so thanks for having me. I think you take it back to what it is we do every day. In our particular case, being in the full service dining, it's about the experience, and the experience has to be executed flawlessly, consistently. It needs to have clarity. And so I think everything that we do, whether it's technology related or anything around what we do in this business, has to center around first the team member being and understanding and feeling a part of that journey and then executing that experience. And so when you think about, you can just go through the motions and create actions, or you can do it really, really well and execute flawlessly. And I think it really, I'm a people culture guy, so at the end of the day, it's those frontline people that need to buy into anything that it is you do. I'd also say that it's really important to remember that anything we do in this restaurant business, we have one single point of entry into that restaurant, which is that general manager, managing partner, whatever you might call that person. Everything funnels through. Yes, there's things around it, but ultimately, that experience starts and ends with the team member to the guest. And I think sometimes we get clouded in all those kind of thoughts around, oh, we can simplify this, or we can do this, or we can do that. At the end of the day, there is a human connection here that we need to remember.
Nigel, do you mind kind of giving your thoughts, views on that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me as well. Firstly, I couldn't agree more with GJ in terms of the team member experience being critical. In our organization, Yum Brands, we've got 4 fantastic brands: KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and the Habit Burger out to the West Coast. And we are 63,000 restaurants in more than 155 countries and territories across the globe. So focus and activity, those are kind of key elements we think about every day. And I would say we approach it from a couple points of view. One, we actually have a leadership course that teaches our leaders about that very topic. So we talk about action versus activity. And so action really is the word that substitutes for focus in this context. And so activity is all the stuff that we do that, yeah, it keeps us busy, but it doesn't actually drive meaningful results. And action is about driving meaningful results that move the business forward. And so a key element of getting to action versus activity, or focus versus activity, for us is having a North Star that we are all aligned behind, a future-backed vision that we understand where we're trying to go across the organization or within a brand, and then we imagine what needs to be true in the short and medium term for the said future to become a reality. So those are principles that we teach and we endorse across the organization to get to a place where we're driving focus versus activity. And the final thing I will say is the difference is our business results, because it does show up in our business results when we're focused rather than just driving activity.
I love that, and it's got to be measurable results.
Yes.
I mean, it absolutely has to be tracked. Blake, would you like to share as well?
Just piggybacking off that, I love that it's, everything comes down to the guest experience, the end user, right? If you're like me, as a marketer, I'm always wanting to do everything all the time, all at once, and do 1,000 things, and sometimes it's hard to stay focused. I mean, I'm at this conference and I'm walking through and seeing all the shiny new toys. I'm like, we could use that, we could use that, we could use that, right? But at the end of the day, it's about the business objectives, the results, right? And I've had some really good bosses, I think, that have helped like de-cloud my mind and focus me, and I try to pass that on to my young staff, because it's all about the clear expectations. At the end of the day, we were always very clear on what the end result should be, the expectations, the objectives, and then leaders have given me the autonomy to kind of manage my activity as long as it passes the smell test, right? And ladders up to that objective, that clear expectation. So I think as leaders, cutting through all the noise and defining clear expectations, and then giving our staff the autonomy to define the activity as long as it ladders up to that objective, I think is the key there.
Love it. Well, and so I'm going to ask I want to keep us moving on this pretty quickly, because we're going to get to the heart of this real quick. Just a short response. In focus and in clarity, oftentimes it's saying no to great ideas. So what's one thing in your world right now that you've had to say, no, this isn't the right time, this isn't the right thing, to keep us focused on what is the ultimate objective and goal that we're looking to drive and what initiative we're looking to drive? So Nigel, I'll start with you.
Yeah, real quickly, I'm going to give a quick example of one a few years ago, a little bit less sensitive at this point in time. And it wasn't a new idea as such. It was an idea that was already on stream and working, because oftentimes you find saying no to something that's already going, where people are emotionally tethered to that particular project, can be pretty hard. And so we had decided to build an internal delivery and driver prioritization system. And we poured a ton of money into it, where outside and in sort of international, sort of outside the specific country, we had within the organization a particular solution that was already working, that was humming. And we really struggled to stop the idea where we were building this particular solution internally. But once we said no to that particular delivery drive and prioritization system, it allowed us to focus on this other platform that we had that was working incredibly well in the organization, so much so that we acquired that business, and that business is across all of our brands right now.
I love that. One thing I want to extract, the emotional attachment goes both ways. So sometimes it can be a tremendous relief when we say no to something, because that's a weight that I've been having to carry, or that I've had to try and find solutions for. GJ, I'll give you a chance as well. What's one thing that you've been saying no to lately?
It's funny. That just happens to be real. It's a very simple example, but Having taken over this organization, which again, trying to get focused and set a strategy that people can buy into and giving people a voice, all those kind of things take a little bit of time. And this happens, I've been there 5 months and it's phenomenal organization. It's just getting people aligned. And this one is a very simple one. It's, oh gosh, we can save some money, energy savings by having, the technology control heating and cooling in a restaurant and a GM can't control it. Well, the operators obviously want to take care of their guests and their team members, and they can't do anything about it without going through a whole bunch of gyrations. No one even thought about it. It's like, oh, we're going to save some money. Well, the reality is, there's a lot of other fish to fry. That's a small example, but that's how people get unfocused because one arm of the organization doesn't understand what really goes on in that restaurant. So it's an easy one to say, let's just not do that right now. Let's figure out how do we apply our strategy and really make this thing work. So it's a small example, but it just shows you how people can get very, very distracted. And again, I go back to my point that everything that we do goes through that restaurant operator, and we need to make sure we're keeping that top of mind.
Absolutely. So it's funny, when I hear that, I hear trade-offs, right? There's always this trade-off and this tension between the guest relationship and how that spans multiple different functions across organizations. So as we look at this, let's look over at innovation versus operational reality. So Blake, in a sea of incredible ideas and opportunities, how do you decide whether or not you can absorb another initiative?
Collaboration, key, right? Nothing marketing does happens in a vacuum. So I spend a lot of my time talking to IT leaders and operations leaders and finance. Finance is usually the dream killer. Everything I come up with, they bring me back down to reality. But that's intentional. So nothing we do happens in a vacuum. So just talking to them and figuring out, I heard the previous speaker say, Dine Brands, global. We have so many staff and so many restaurants, but we all run pretty lean, and we run pretty lean. We're over $1 billion global company with 600 locations. But if you look at our support center, and especially our marketing team, we don't have a lot of resources, right? And I feel like a lot of restaurant and family entertainment companies are like that right now. So we really have to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff and figure out what's going to have the biggest impact. And that's not just me saying that. That's collaboration with our partners. Because we don't have a whole lot of resources. We really have to make very smart decisions, big, impactful decisions to make some real change.
Love that. And Nigel, similarly, you obviously run a wonderful global organization as well. What do you say not yet to? Who gets to say not yet?
Well, I would say one of my roles right now is I lead what we call our Global Operations Council. And so that's our most senior leaders across all the brands in the operations space. And so from an operations standpoint, that's the group that comes together and says not yet based on an aligned North Star vision, based on what's already happening, based on listening to our restaurant general managers and what their needs are, what their biggest problems are. And so I think really going through that prioritization exercise and thinking through what aligns to where we want to go. If it's great, is it urgent, is it important? Let's go with it. If it's not, doesn't meet those filters, perhaps we put it in the parking lot and say not yet. But we have a pretty good aligned group in terms of operations that gets together on a monthly basis and twice per year in person that gets to say not yet.
And that's, having the systems and the team and kind of that structure in place is key. Somebody's got to drive that within the organization. Mm-hmm. And within your portfolio, and what I love about GJ, what you're bringing to the table here is you've got a lot of variation within your portfolio. Like, how does complexity change that calculus for you?
Well, I think you have to look at each individual brand and make sure you identify what those needs and issues are. And I would tell you the same thing that Nigel just said. I think ultimately it's operators who are making it happen need to give you the feedback on how much can they take, should they take, why should they take it, and you need to find the champions and ambassadors of whatever that initiative is. within the operator community, and then decide, and to your point, the gatekeeper in terms of a calendar of events of things that are going to happen or not happen, and to make sure people are aligned around that, constantly communicated throughout the organization. Again, I sound like a broken record around this, but at the end of the day, all of us are here to support those restaurants and those operators and to make their lives easier. So let's make sure we ask the right questions and make sure that we align those efforts. And at the end of the day, if you have a champion in the operations area, then it's going to get done. Right? You're going to learn faster. You're going to be able to move faster as a result. Because we can preach from up high as all we think we know it all. But at the end of the day, an operator to an operator saying this is the greatest thing since sliced bread is going to make it happen. And I think we need to just bear that in mind.
I love that. So all of this leads to one of the most complicated issues that we're facing as an industry right now. And I'll make it akin to, it's kind of who owns the menu in your restaurants, right? Is that supply chain? Is it marketing? Is it culinary? Is it purchase? Like, there are so many different stakeholders in this, and it's a very collaborative effort. But, this idea of owning the guest relationship. So 10 years ago, ownership of the guest relationship felt, loyalty sits in marketing, data sits in technology, execution sits in operations. But we also have now this marketplace that sometimes sits between us and the guest. And so when everybody touches that relationship, ultimately, focus can fracture. So let's kind of go in and define this a little bit more clearly. So Nigel, in your organization, who ultimately has accountability for the guest relationship?
So this is evolving and continuing to mature across our organization, but I would say we wrestled with this a few years ago quite a lot, and then we decided to make a shift into sort of product model way of operating. And in effect, what that means is across the team member journey, we identified particular mini GMs, if you like, that owned those points across the journey. And as such, we're very clear on that right now across many elements of our organization. And so when we think about ownership, we have teams across the points in the journey that sort of own those particular interactions with ultimate accountability, either falling into that GM's purview for that particular point. But ultimately, it still does cut back to organizationally, we all have a vested interest in the guest relationship, and we all must be thinking about it to drive it forward.
And I love that because we want to have shared ownership in that, right? But at the same time, if performance drops, to ask it a little bit differently, whose compensation is impacted by that?
We have a really robust compensation structure, right? That is fortunate or unfortunate, where when we think about loyalty, if we're lagging in that, of course that ladders up to same-store sales growth. It ladders up to system sales. It ladders up to AUV and ultimately to shareholder value. So, really all our executives are incented in order to ensure that performance continues to build.
Gotcha. And so Blake, on your side, similarly, like who owns the guest relationship within the Chuck E. Cheese ecosystem?
Yeah, I think marketing owns the guest relationship from a development standpoint, we define it, we communicate it, we execute it, right? But again, back to cross-collaboration, it takes IT and operations to deliver on that promise, right? So we spend a lot of time talking about what we're capable of, like if it's a juice worth the squeeze, the impact, right? From the communication side, ours is kind of interesting because marketing now owns, and this is recent, we now own kind of the stack, right? So the vendors, the communication, the platforms, the data, and then we execute on that, and not IT, right? And because that's the pace of our business requires that, I think IT is built for stability, but marketing's built for agility. So essentially, that's the way it's set up is very deliberate, so we can move at a really, really quick clip. But I mean, in a nutshell, it's everybody has a piece of that.
Right. And so, GJ, from your perspective, ideal state, what does that ownership model look like within an organization? And I'm going to make it more specific because every organization may be slightly different, right? But within your own, what does an ideal kind of structure of that look like?
Well, I was actually going to say when you were talking about whose compensation's affected, I think you know this. I believe very much into a partner program within the restaurant business. Every company I've been a part of, I've put that in one way, shape, or form. And that partnership basically says that operator of that single unit restaurant is going to get their compensation based on a monthly basis by being a true partner and owner effectively on a profits base. So their salary is low, they get a percentage of their profits of that restaurant. So ultimately, they're motivated to be a part of doing the right things for the team member as well as the guest. And so if things don't go well from a marketing perspective or technology perspective, they're going to be impacted. Yes, if you're an executive in the company, you usually are aligned on the macro, what the overall goals are. But I think you have to drill it back down into that operator. I call it an internal franchise system. So everything that we're talking about in terms of who owns that, at the end of the day, the restaurant owns it and that operator owns it. If it's outside the restaurant through third party, they still own it because at the end of the day, if that delivery driver isn't right or whatever, they're trying to get a hold of the restaurant. So hopefully you have the support to make sure that they don't have to deal with that. But at the end of the day, that's where it moves. And so, and you see that as a result of your top line numbers and what you're doing. So I also just want to point out just maybe a little bit different think on it is, who owns the data? And the data is about the guest. And so that's a much bigger topic here, but we're all challenged with that when you have third-party providers that aren't sharing that data. So now you've got a different question. And so I would just tell you that it's sort of bifurcated in terms of how I think about it and just how are we going to deal with that.
I love the transition here. So when things don't go perfectly, when the plan goes haywire, when a guest orders digitally, earns loyalty points, arrives for pickup, and something fails, that's a great opportunity to show the culture and the identity of the brand and the organization. How do you respond to those? Like some of your most fervent opportunities to build that relationship are when things go wrong, and you've all experienced this, right? So when the system fails, who owns fixing it end to end? Like how do you jump in and identify the champion that's going to, oh, hey, here's where the gap in the issue is? Because when it's held across so many responsible leaders and partners, who takes the initiative there? And so I just wanted to kind of open it up for a little bit of a conversation. So feel free to jump in on this.
I'll start on that. I mean, at the end of the day, that goes back to the overall culture of the organization. What's the vision of the company, and what are those core values that drive to that ultimate outcome that you're trying to get to? And so it's truly about the leadership and how much do they truly believe and are committed and convicted to whatever that vision on the guest experience is all about, and how you have guest recovery. I would much rather have people be much more autonomous and do something, even if it's wrong, than versus sitting there and say, not my job, man. So I just think that, I think it's just a completely, it completely goes back to who's on your team, what do they believe in, are they feeling a part of the journey, and do they feel like their voice matters, and do they understand how they fit into the total puzzle? And so I go back to its people and culture.
Love that.
I'm just going to quickly say this is an absolute passion point of mine right here among everything else we've talked about. As a matter of fact, I'm just about to kick off a global guest recovery program because today we're a little bit fragmented in that space. But I see this very clearly in terms of what we want to do as we talk about our RGM store teams. I think we want to make it as easy as possible for them to do recovery, not handcuff them, but allow them to go the extra mile. So what are the systems and tools and processes that we're putting in place to make that happen? And then I think we also want to make it as easy as possible for our guests, right? I think organizations these days make it really hard for guests to feel whole when things break. And I think making that as easy as possible through digitization, through automation is really, really important. And overall, we also want to have a systemic process that looks at the systemic issues on a set frequency, so we can kind of fix the underlying system so this stuff doesn't happen over and over again. So that's how I'm thinking about it, and it's critical.
Yeah, I think we kind of look at things a little bit different. I mean, guest recovery, of course, we have mechanisms in place, and an entire call center, and guest relations is housed under marketing. But in terms of the marketing approach, just as much as we think about the guest experience, we're also thinking about the employee experience too. If you think, and being a little bit more proactive in terms of the things that we roll out and the way that we roll it out to the stores. Because if you think about, if you've been to a Chuck E. Cheese lately, we call them cast members, those are our cashiers. They're 16 years old, right? They are very young, it's probably their first job. They're dealing with tech, with games, they're dealing with birthdays and events and food and trampolines, and some of them have to go back and I can't technically say they get in the costume, but you guys are all adults, so they get in the costume. But at Chuck E. Cheese, we call it waking Chucky. My husband thinks that's totally creepy, but we just can't give away the secrets. But they have to go back there every hour on the hour and dance and put on a show, so they're acting a little bit. They're managing a line on a busy, they're dealing with moms, they're dealing with children. So thinking about that, we're always very deliberate in what we roll out and eliminating any sort of barriers and friction points for them, just as much as we're focused on eliminating barriers and friction points for guests. It's really for them. Mm-hmm. So thinking about technology, a recent example. So we've started a subscription program, an annual subscription program. It's been very successful over the last year. But there's a piece of technology where you can't sign up for an annual subscription at the point of purchase at the POS. You have to do it online because there's things you have to sign and whatnot. So just being at a fun center and listening to our operations teams and watching the flow, they're selling, we're tasking them to sell these things, and then you have to scan a QR code, and then, hey mom, go stand over to the side and fill out your paperwork, and then come back or go get back in the line. And it creates this just crazy chaos. So now we're partnering with operations and IT to implement at the point of sale, signing up for membership within under a minute and making it super fast, and then signing your paperwork at a later time. So things like that, always listening and using technology and using feedback on the front end to avoid, having to do the guest recovery is something that we're constantly thinking about.
On that. So we talked a little bit about where this focus breaks. What we wanted to provide and share is just kind of a walk away. This is what, as a panel, what we're talking about is the focus test, right? F is the fit for the guest promise. O, operational readiness. C, is there clear ownership around this? Do we understand the ROI across your organization? Does your GM understand the impact that this decision is making, right? And then strategically, is it simple? Is this easy to execute, or does it create a whole lot of complexity into the system? And so focus is the leadership decision that's going to be absolutely critical as we look to how our company is, how our operations, how our teams, how our culture is shaped for the future. One final thought on this for the group here. As technology multiplies possibility, focus is going to determine the impact. The guest doesn't experience your organization chart, they experience your execution.